Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the September meeting of the Finance Committee of the MTA. Looking forward to a thoughtful conversation, our usual agenda with the inclusion of a discussion about the implications on the finances for the capital plan, at least an early indication on the debt side of things that Kevin will provide us. David, any public speakers?
Yes, we have two public speakers today. The first public speaker is Brian Fritsch, who will be followed by Jason Anthony.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Brian Fritsch, Associate Director for PCAC, the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA. The challenges facing you as Finance Committee members are immense. Fare evasion, climate change, and helping to secure funding for the next capital plan while congestion pricing remains paused. It's daunting. PCAC believes that the capital plan laid out by MTA leadership wisely prioritizes the state of good repair projects that will keep this system safe and reliable for riders for years to come. But make no mistake, there is very little fat on the bone. If Governor Hochul fails to fully fund this plan, the system will suffer and riders will flee, leaving the MTA in desperate straits. We are skeptical she can deliver. The governor's lukewarm statement last week does not exactly engender confidence, nor does the fact that she continues to hold the current capital plan hostage by refusing to unpause congestion pricing. We urge you to engage with state legislators to ensure they understand how crucial this capital plan is to the economic vitality of New York State, knowing that it supports manufacturing and construction jobs in every corner. Their efforts will be essential to finding the funding necessary to raise the $33 to $35 billion we appear to be short. They will be hearing from us too. To borrow an Olympic metaphor, funding this capital plan feels like running the steeplechase. It'll be long, full of hurdles, and has unexpected water lurking in places it probably shouldn't be. Yet finishing this race is more important than earning a medal. It's about sustaining a system that millions of riders depend on daily and allows the New York City metro area to function, and we can't afford to fail. Governor Hochul must unpause congestion pricing, and it is critical we collectively explore every possible option to fund the next capital plan without delay. Thank you.
Thank you. Our second and final speaker is Jason Anthony.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Neil, Kevin, and everybody else. Jason Anthony here from the Long Island Railroad 88 Task Force. I have two news flashes for you guys. One, I have right here my student Omni Metro card. I got it from CUNY. The second news flash is that next month, the Port Authority's committee and their CFO, Libby McCarthy, will yet again, like every year, she will announce two things. One, the air train that's already very costly will announce another fare increase that will create, again, another burden for those travelers and locals that travel to and from JFK Airport. And two, raise their tolls on their bridges and tunnels due to, quote-unquote, inflation. Kevin, we cannot afford another fare and toll increase in our subways and commuter rails. What we could do to avoid another fiscal cliff is our responsibility to tell our legislatures in Albany to support our capital plan and tell them once and for all to unpause congestion pricing. I'll see you guys on Wednesday.
Thank you. That concludes the public speakers.
Thank you, our public speakers. Appreciate your thoughts. Let's get a look at our July minutes, please, for board approval. Can I have a motion, please? Second. Okay, any edits or deletions, corrections? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstention, motion passes. Next up is the formerly known as Budget Watch, aka the Financial Performance Report. Dave, you want to take us through the highlights, and then we'll ask for comments?
Certainly. I'll be providing year-to-date results through August against the mid-year forecast, which was presented at the July board meeting. Year-to-date August 2024 preliminary results were favorable by $208 million. with favorable results for operating expenses, commuter rail farebox revenue, operating subsidies, debt service expense, and investment income more than offsetting shortfalls of subway and bus farebox ridership and B&T toll revenue. Operating revenues on a year-to-date basis were $84 million, or 2% unfavorable. Passenger revenues were $75 million unfavorable, and toll revenue was $14 million unfavorable. Subway farebox revenue was $45 million, or 2% unfavorable, and bus farebox revenue was $57 million, or 12% unfavorable, for a combined $102 million unfavorable year-to-date. As a reminder, the mid-year forecast includes a remaining reserve of $167 million for 2024 to offset this unfavorable subway and bus results. So it's $102 million unfavorable for bus and subway, and there's a $167 million reserve. Conversely, Long Island Railroad and Metro North farebox revenue were each $14 million, or 4% favorable. Operating subsidies year-to-date through August were $48 million, or 1% favorable. Excluding investment income, subsidies directed to the operating budget were favorable by $34 million. This was primarily driven by favorable results for the real estate-related taxes, the urban tax and the mortgage recording tax, which were combined $32 million favorable year-to-date. As a reminder, this favorability is measured against the mid-year forecast, which was lowered from the adopted budget. Capital subsidies were $2 million favorable year-to-date through August. Operating expenses were favorable by $228 million, or 2% year-to-date through August, mostly due to timing-related favorable results at Transit, Long Island Railroad, MTA Bus, Headquarters, and C&D. In addition to timing of expenses, Transit's variance reflects favorable payroll due to vacancies, which is more than offset by unfavorable overtime, unfavorable paratransit expenses reflecting higher trip volume and support costs and mostly offset by higher city reimbursement for paratransit expenses, and favorable electric power expense. The underround at the Long Island Railroad mainly reflects lower average pay rates due to the mixture of employee pay grades, higher project reimbursements, and favorable electric power. Metro North's unfavorable variance was primarily due to increased payroll in connection with lower reimbursable activities, training and associated expenses related to new employees, overtime, and an increase in claims expenses. Overtime year-to-date through August was $175 million, or 31% unfavorable through the MTA, while payroll was $139 million, or 3% favorable. Debt service was $16 million favorable year-to-date through August, and there are further details in the financial performance report.
Great, thank you, David. Any questions or comments? Okay, hearing, I have just a couple of questions, if you don't mind, David.
Sure.
One is, obviously, we saw an uptick in the month relative to year-to-date on MRT and urban taxes. Do you think that's a sustainable trend? Is that tied to interest rates coming down, or is that a one-time blip?
I would say it definitely does not tie to the reality the rates went down, but it may have gone down due to the expectation that rates were going to come down, because most of this activity that we're seeing money on basically was 2 months ago.
Yeah, good. Well, that's a positive trend for us to consider. And then on the other side of the ledger, subway ridership. Is this a fare evasion issue, or is this a ridership issue that we're seeing in the uptick in August? Do you have a sense?
Well, what we see paid ridership, and paid ridership is tracking the same way farebox revenue is tracking, which is lower than what the expectation was from McKinsey. So you can speculate or concur that it's fare evasion, but I don't have the specifics on.
Yeah, I think David's correct that we don't know the exact, but if you look at the level of fare evasion versus what McKinsey projected fare evasion, if we were at the lower fare evasion levels in the McKinsey, particularly on buses, our revenue would be on budget, not below budget. So I think fare evasion is still, again, without being able to tie the exact effect, if you do the math, I think fare evasion is what's causing the variance.
Understood. All right, hearing no other questions, Olga, over to you for Finance Watch, please.
Good afternoon. This month, we're reporting the results of bond sale we executed in August, and also providing preliminary information for bond sale scheduled for October. On August 21st, we issued $699 million of Trevor Bridge and Tunnel Authority General Revenue Bonds, Series 2024A. In addition to providing new money proceeds to fund existing bridge and tunnel capital projects, this transaction also refunded outstanding TBTA bonds, including TBTA bonds issued as Build America bonds for positive net present value savings of $19.2 million or 4.4% of the refunded par. This transaction was led by a certified MBE Buchanan senior manager, Ramirez and Company, together with special core senior managers, Rice Financial Products Company, which is an MBE firm, Drexel Hamilton as DVOB firm, and Stern Brothers, which is an MBE firm. Oric Harrington and Brian Rubino served as co-bond counsel, and Prague and Backstrom McCarley Berry served as co-financial advisors. As far as our planned bond issuances, next month we expect to issue approximately $700 million of dedicated tax fund green bonds. This bond sale will retire outstanding Trevor Bridge and Tunnel payroll mobility tax fund anticipation notes, which mature on December 16 of this year. And subject to market conditions, this transaction could also include a bond refunding component. This concludes my report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Olga? All right, hearing none, thank you, Olga. So we're going to move on to, as I mentioned at the top of the meeting, we're going to hear a bit of a debt perspective related to the capital plan from Kevin, which I think is indicative of the question that David was asking at the tail end of the capital program committee. So, floor is yours.
Thank you, and I have a, bless you, short presentation. Is somebody pulling that up? There we go. Thank you. So, just stepping back, again, the capital program proposed at $68.4 billion, as you know, still has a lot of funding to be worked out. One thing in our proposed capital program is how much debt MTA for transit and commuter projects and TBTA for bridge and tunnel projects, how much debt we're proposing to be a source of funding as a portion of that 68.4. So what we've recommended is total debt of 13 billion of additional debt in support of the 25 to 29 capital program, 10 billion for transit and commuter, and 3 billion TBTA to be self-funded with their debt. So the question is that too little, too much? How do we arrive at that number, and how does it compare with historically what MTA's contributed to capital programs? So I want to walk through with you a couple slides that'll give you a sense of the impact of that 13 billion of debt on MTA finances. I'll say just my conclusion is I think 13 billion is a manageable number. It keeps us within some of our debt measurement goals, but it's a, I'll call it, it's a stretch number, which we have to do because it's, there's a lot of important needs in the capital program. Clearly, if you look at, the outside Citizens Budget Commission, for example, put out a report recommending MTA issue much less debt under, basically under their analysis that we already have in the out years stress on our operating budget. And so if the operating budget has deficits out in 27 to 28, how do you afford to then add more debt service onto the operating budget? The controller's office put out a report. They had somewhat higher range of debt levels within, and we're kind of within that, but that's the kind of the competing is, on the one hand, we really don't have a lot of spare dollars in the operating budget to, dedicate to a lot more new debt. because we don't want the capital program funded on the back of riders and higher fares and tolls, but we do have some financial flexibility to incorporate it. So that's kind of my backdrop. Let's look at some numbers.
If you don't address those needs in a timely fashion, they'll get more expensive the longer you wait also. So you have that
The
issue.
capital needs.
Yes.
Yeah, and Andrew, your point's well taken. When I think of the financial health of the MTA, right, yes, on the expense side, you'd like as little debt service as possible, but you also need to invest in capital, invest in early to keep costs down, as well as, reliability and safety and performance drives the revenue side of the equation, which is also needed for financial health. So this pie diagram here.
One right behind.
Yeah. Sorry. This just compares the current capital program on the left, 20 to 24, and the mix of funding sources to the proposed 25 to 29 plan. And again, every capital program's always had a mix of federal, state, city, and MTA sources. And so if you just focus on the orange the orange wedges, that in the previous capital program, MTA and TBTA bonds funded about 18%, or about 10.2 billion in debt. Our proposal is 13 billion, which is roughly 19% of the $68 billion capital program. So basically covering the same amount. If you take into our anticipated federal money, and then if we assume, and again, we haven't gotten any pre-agreements out of the state and the city, as I look at Mira here, but if you assume that the state and the city, through their direct appropriations, contribute the same percentage of the core capital program, that would take the previous 6.1 billion of state and city and grow it to about 8 billion. That still leaves a funding gap or sources to be identified of 33.4. The other item I'll just point out is on the federal, we're assuming 14 billion. That assumes, where we're 13 billion, so that's a relatively aggressive assumption. We're assuming, even though the IIJA needs to be reauthorized at the end of 2026, we're assuming funding levels at that, get reauthorized at the higher infrastructure spending levels, which is not that easy, and there is natural inflation growth in the federal grants, and that we also get substantial federal money for the IBX project. So, David, you're looking at me with the...
Have you brought in scenarios where, given the political landscape, it doesn't work that way?
Well, so
What's Plan B and C?
Yeah. Well, so like in any capital program, and we've had prior capital programs where funding sources have been identified and then they haven't fully come in. And so usually then what happens is we either amend capital programs to reflect either lower funding or higher funding, as well as, remember, we don't commit contracts unless we've got identified funding. So if we get into the 25 to 29 program, we get into election results and we turn much more negative on the federal availability, we then will slow our commitments until we know the outcome of that.
Okay.
That's how we manage that. And again, like as Neil says, a budget is a plan, and this is a capital budget and a capital plan, right? So here's how many MTA and TBTA bonds we've issued for the previous 4 capital programs and the proposal, and you'll see, roughly speaking, the 13 billion is in line, with prior programs. If you look, all the programs, 2005 to 9 to 15 to 19, the first three programs, those were much smaller programs. They're capital programs in the 30-ish billion range, and MTA's the percent of MTA bonds that were contributed were much higher, up in the 37%. That would be to fund 37% of a $68 billion program would put another $800 million a year on top of the operating budget costs that we just couldn't afford. But again, we think this represents that our proposal is in line with kind of previous commitments. Just to let you know kind of where we are, a quick snapshot. We have $41.7 billion of debt outstanding that's payable from the operating budget that is still outstanding for prior programs. We still have some remaining debt to issue for the 20 to 24 plan, and this would be on top of that. We do retire debt every year. Is that debt service number that you approve in the budget of roughly $3 billion isn't all interest. We retire roughly $1 billion to $1.5 billion debt of principal a year. So the new debt authorized, our debt doesn't grow fully by that amount, is offset by some retirements.
That's a very important point. I think we generally don't talk about retiring of debt in this forum. I think it's a worthwhile point for everyone on the board members to realize we're not just keeping all the debt and just constantly pushing it into the future. So there is some retirement.
Right. The federal government doesn't retire any debt. We do.
That's good.
Do you have a debt limit or cap?
So in terms of issuing debt for capital, they have to be approved in the capital program. So this debt that we're proposing does, part of your submission to the capital program review board is not only for those projects, but for the debt, MTA debt as a funding source. TBTA's debt's not subject to CPRB approval and so forth. There is also a statutory cap in legislation that limits MTA's debt overall for capital programs, and that's roughly and that's not an outstanding, that's debt issued over time, and I think that's like at $90 billion right now, and it's supposed to take into account all the remaining issuance and past debt that was retired, but there is a statutory caps. So why is this additional debt affordable? Well, one thing I've talked about in committee is trying to keep over a long-term basis that if our debt service grows by more than 3% a year, you're going to just add to deficit because we can't expect revenues to grow by more than 3%. If we get 2% a year out of tolls, some of our taxes do grow by 4%, but I use 3 as a barometer of if it's growing faster. If you look historically, before 2020, it grew like at 4.5%, sometimes 5, 6% a year. So what this chart shows, the dotted line is 3% compounded growth, and the bar is actual debt service through 2025, where the blue is our existing debt, the gray is debt remaining to be issued for the 20 to 24 program, and then the orange is this additional debt service that we would take on. And so you see, if the only 2 bars we had were 2020 and 2035, you see that we stay within 3% overall. There are a few years in kind of what I'll call the pinch years in 2030 through 32, where the debt service is a little bit above that target, and that's because we're waiting for our existing debt service actually drops after those kind of peak years. But if you look at it, generally in line with 3% growth. Here is just zeroing in on what do we have in our financial plan versus what would be additional debt service above and beyond our projected budgets. Now, our financial plan only goes to 2028, but if you then project 3% growth after that, this will put incremental pressure on the operating budget out in the years, really 2031 and 32. We think they're manageable. Olga's team does refundings every year, which saves us in debt service and so forth. But, I don't want you, just because I say, oh, our debt service don't grow by more than 3% a year, doesn't mean that, you don't need to find money to pay for that debt service. And so there is, some out year dollars that we either need to, find other savings. A great savings would be if some of these investments reduce fare evasion and we get revenue to cover this. But, we do need to accommodate it in the budget in the future. The last chart, which I'll call the David Jones chart, is debt service is projected to be roughly 15% of the operating budget, where from 24 through 35 we average 15.2%. You'll see there are those few years, the same years where we showed the pinch years out in 31, 32, where we're closer to 16% than 15. It'd be nice to always stay below that line and not have to use our years of lower percentages to balance out the higher percentages. But it's roughly in line with that 15%. So but the bottom line is, when I getting back to my previous discussion, the 13 billion we see as affordable, but when I call it a stretch, because it does push us just at or slightly above the limits. We'd rather see all of it be below 15%.
Yeah.
We'd like to see debt service, not to have debt service that we have to find room in the operating budget. I think this is a good balance, but it indicates to me that, we can't just easily add billions more of debt on top of this proposal to, fund the capital program.
By 28 and 29, we better have done something about fare evasion, so.
That's right. That's the plan. So with that, I'll open up for questions.
Questions? Okay, hearing none, I'm just going to make one remark, which is, I think this should give us confidence as a committee at least, that there is a very thoughtful approach, measured approach, and a controlled approach to the debt side of this question. That doesn't mean, and if you go back to his first pie chart, there's an enormous amount of unknown. There's more than half, I think, basically, of the plan is an unknown. And as I said in the capital meeting, at least in my perspective, our role is to primarily focus on uses and not sources, since we don't have a lot of control. Obviously, if the left-hand side of that pie chart cannot be solved, meaning the sources, then we're going to have to think about it because of the plan. Because obviously, this is an appropriate approach with 13% of the $13 billion. If you had to pay the rest of it out of debt, obviously that would change everything dramatically. It's something that would be not prudent for this committee or this board to do. So thank you to you, to Jay and the team for this thoughtful presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, I just was curious about the anticipation of federal dollars. The IIJA, most of the funds have not been allocated, so it would be in the out years, which would be part of the time period of the next capital program. Or is those dollars allocated to the existing program, or is it an overlap?
So, starting with next year's federal dollars, we allocate that to the 25 to 29 plan. So, federal dollars that we receive we do it in five-year windows. So the issue is not that we won't have federal dollars, it's what's going to be that level. So, for example, prior to IIJA, our federal formula grant money was approximately $1.65 billion a year. With the IIJA, it's closer to $2.2 billion a year. We think, since IIJA is authorized for another 2 years, again, it's all subject to congressional appropriation, but there's the underlying
And who gets elected.
authorization that, you know, we think, you know, for the next 2 years on at least the formula, we'll get that 2.2.
It's the 3 years after.
The question is, the 3 years after that, will it go back down to the 1.6? Will it stay at 2.2 with additional dollars for inflation or not? And that's the biggest uncertainty.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. David, back to you on headquarters and agency items.
Thank you. There is one non-procurement item this month, which seeks board
Right.
approval to revise the MTA all-agency investment guidelines to provide additional authorization to invest in money market funds that meet the definition of government money market fund under SEC's Rule 2A7 under the Investment Company Act of 1940. Olga Chernod and Scott Gerstner are available for questions.
Maybe you could just highlight what's different about the policy now. Is there anything new that's dramatically changed?
So this is not really a dramatic change. Most of the portfolio is managed by investing it into U.S. Treasury securities. So this authorization will allow us to invest a portion of the portfolio in governmental money market funds. And it's important here that it's governmental, which means that these money markets are basically limited to largely purchasing U.S. Treasury securities and repos collateralized with U.S. Treasury securities. So from a risk profile perspective, we're not going to really change the risk profile of the portfolio by introducing governmental money market funds. What this will provide us is flexibility for something like money market sweeps, right, which is a handy tool that's really utilized in all best money managing practices. In terms of daily cash investments, we often use directly purchased collateralized repo securities. The yields on governmental money markets are very comparable, so it's just a flexible alternative to direct purchase of repos and other short-term treasury securities.
Okay. Any questions about this slight change to our plan?
No.
Hearing none, a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you, David. Second. Thank you, Mark. Any comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstention, motion passes. Thank you. Lizette, onto procurements, please.
And is this working on? Okay.
What?
I was just making sure that the mic was working.
We can't hear you over here, but.
All right, so I'm glad I asked.
Maybe the internet can hear you.
Okay, all right. So there are 3 MTA headquarters items this month for Finance Committee approval in the estimated amount of $3.04 billion. These actions are found in the September 2024 Finance Committee book. Note that all these items submitted to Finance and recommended for board approval this month are the result of competitive RFPs. The board is requested to authorize the MTA Assistant Deputy Chief Procurement Officer to approve the exercise of all options included in these items if it is in the best interest of the MTA at the time. The first item is an award of a competitively negotiated personal services contract to Sedgwick Claims Management Services in the amount of $86.9 million to provide New York Workers' Compensation Program third-party administrator and related services to New York City Transit and other MTA participating agencies. This contract is for an initial term of 3 years with 3 one-year options. MTA agency workers' compensation claims are administered by the Workers' Compensation Unit within the MTA's Law Department, the Compensation Unit within the MTA Law Department. Approximately 5,000 claims are filed by MTA employees each year. The MTA has historically self-administered its workers' comp program, which has resulted in the unit. This has resulted in the unit being hampered by a shortage of staff, inadequate, cumbersome IT systems, lack of training capacity and expertise, and paper-based processes. Despite the best efforts and commitments of the workers' comp unit staff, all of this has resulted in suboptimal claims handling. The MTA engaged a global consultancy firm to review the MTA's workers' compensation program and recommend short and long-term strategic initiatives. The firm found that outsourcing program administration to a third-party administrator would result in annual reduction of $20 million or more in workers' compensation program costs. The costs of the transit program alone have steadily increased and exceeded $240 million in 2023. The projected savings are in the areas of disability, medical, litigation, safety management, and claims processing. The costs related to the procurement of these services will be offset by a right-sizing of the MTA workers' comp unit over time. A two-step RFP procurement process was utilized to issue this contract. For the pre-qualification step 1, responses were received from 10 firms, 8 were asked to submit proposals for step 2, and 4 firms responded. The selection committee determined that Sedgwick's proposal was the most advantageous to the MTA based on the selection criteria. Additionally, as a result of negotiations, Sedgwick's final offer was 26% lower than its initial one. The second item includes 2 actions. The first being the award of a 5-year competitively negotiated personal services contract to Caremark PCS Health, or CVS Health, to provide pharmacy benefit management services. CVS Health will administer prescription drug benefits for eligible plan members from the New York City Transit, MTA Bus, and Sertoa employees, covering approximately 155,000 employees, retirees, and their dependents. The contract term is 5 years, which includes 2 one-year options. The total not-to-exceed price for this action is $2.73 billion and includes the base and option costs. There are 2 proposed plans for this contract, a commercial plan that primarily serves members ineligible for Medicare, and an employer group waiver plan, which serves Medicare-eligible members, taking advantage of financial incentives for employers made available through the Affordable Care Act. A 2-step RFP process was also utilized. Step 1 was to pre-qualify firms that met the MTA's minimum requirements for a contract award, and in Step 2, the pre-qualified firms received the detailed RFP package. 3 firms were pre-qualified and were subsequently asked to submit proposals for Step 2. The benefits coverage requirements of the RFP were all informed by collective bargaining. The MTA was assisted in this process by Mercer Health and Benefits, a benefits advisory consultant. Using its proprietary financial model, Mercer evaluated the initial, revised, and best and final offer pricing submissions, which were compared to the industry benchmarks. CVS Health's BAFO of $2.73 billion includes projected claims as well as rebates and EGWP revenue. When comparing the initial CVS Health proposal to its BAFO, a 5-year total cost avoidance of $94.7 million was achieved over the life of the contract. This cost avoidance was achieved after negotiations due to improvements in pricing terms. CVS's proposal offered the best value for the MTA. The second action for this item is the added funding to the current contract for this service in the amount of $14.7 million for the continued provision of pharmacy benefits for the same population through December 31st, 2024, the current contract's expiration date. The 2024 estimates were adjusted upwards in order to reflect an increase in enrollment and more utilization of high-cost drugs. The third and final item is the award of a competitively negotiated personal services contract to Cigna Health and Life Insurance to provide health care benefits inclusive of medical and prescription coverage for Metro North non-represented and represented employees and their dependents residing in Connecticut, covering approximately 2,700 members. The contract term is 5 years, including 2 one-year options. The total cost of this contract, including the option years, is $208.9 million. This new contract solicitation will replace M&R's current contract for this service provided by another vendor that expires on December 31st, 2024. A 2-step RFP process was also used to issue a successor contract, starting with the pre-qualification step to identify firms that met the minimum requirements. The pre-qualified firms then received the detailed RFP package, 4 submitted responses. The RFP allowed for both fully insured and self-insured plan options. Cigna's self-insured BAFO was $5.2 million less, or 2.5% lower, when compared to the next lowest proposal. The selection committee convened and voted unanimously to recommend Cigna's self-insured option as a recommendation for award, since it offered the best value to the MTA based on the evaluation criteria for this procurement.
Okay, great. Can we take that as a package? Yes, okay. Can I have a motion to approve these technically 4 items, please? Thank you, Mark. Second. Thank you, Mira. Any questions? Again, multiple items. We have CVS for most employees as for pharmacy benefit. We've got workman's comp as a new third-party use. Usually we've had it in-house. And thirdly, we've got the Connecticut employees of Metro North for an HMO. Any comments? Any thoughts? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstention, motion passes. Thank you very much. Lizette, you may continue, please.
There are two information items for the New York City Transit Committee as follows. The first item is a request that the board approve the use of the competitive request for proposals process pursuant to the New York State Public Authorities Law for the procurement of a para-transit camera security system for New York City Transit. The second item is a request that the board approve the modification of a contract with Omni Rehab for eligibility assessment services for paratransit and reduced fare to establish an eligibility assessment center at 3 Stone Street in Lower Manhattan. There are no information items for Metro North procurements at this time. There are no information items for Long Island Railroad procurements this month. There are no information items for bridges and tunnels procurements this month either.
I suspect there are no questions then, since there's no items. Any questions? Okay, hearing none. David, the floor is yours. Florio, that is.
No? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real estate has 6 action items for consideration and approval. The first 2 items are for the Metropolitan Transportation Authority and include a license agreement with the Municipal Credit Union for the installation and maintenance of ATMs at various bus facilities and the MTA headquarters here at 2 Broadway, and also a license agreement with Clear Channel for billboard advertising on MTA agency properties. The third and fourth items are for the Long Island Railroad and include a grant of permanent and temporary easements to Amtrak for its East River Tunnel Rehab project at the Sunnyside Yards in Queens. And then there's a lease with SNH Medical Office Properties Trust for medical and administrative offices at 2 Old Country Road in Mineola. The final 2 action items are for MTA Metro North Railroad and include a conveyance of property interest to Hudson Harbor LLC in support of an 88-unit multifamily transit-oriented development in Tarrytown and an acquisition of property interest from the Village of Pleasantville in support of a Harlem and Hudson Power Improvement Project. There are, in addition, 8 information items. The first 4 are for New York City Transit, a license agreement between Transit and the Whitman Museum of Art for installation and maintenance of artwork at the West 4th Street Station, J Street, Metro Tech, and Fordham Road stations. A license agreement between Transit and the Brooklyn Public Library for the installation and maintenance of artwork at the Euclid Avenue Station. A license agreement between New York City Transit and Los Herederos for the installation and maintenance of community-inspired artwork in a radio studio at the Jackson Heights Roosevelt Avenue Station. And finally, a license agreement between Transit and Palima for the installation of multi-channel audio system to play recorded compositions at the Chambers Street Station. The next 2 information items are for the Long Island Railroad. They are a license agreement between the Long Island Railroad and Archer Towers Phase 1 development for the installation and maintenance of artwork along the Long Island Railroad's retaining wall in Jamaica, and a license agreement between the Long Island Railroad and the City of Long Beach for temporary maintenance of equipment and mobile facility adjacent to the Long Beach Station. The last 2 items are for Metro North Railroad, short-term parking permit for Bike New York for the use of parking spaces at Poughkeepsie, and a report on retail agreements entered into directly by real estate pursuant to MTA board policy. I note that Lucy Zachman, head of MTA advertising and customer experience, is here to answer questions regarding the second action item, and Bob Paley, head of MTA's transit-oriented development group, is here to answer any questions regarding the 5th action item.
Great, David, thank you. There's 6 action items for our approval on real estate. Can I have a motion to approve? Thank you. Second? Thank you, Mira. Any questions? Yes.
I'm sure you've heard me say this before, so forgive me if I sound like a broken record, but when there's multiple stations on different lines, it would be really helpful if you could say which line that is. For instance, you've got Fordham Road. I assume you're talking about the B and D and not the 4 line, but...
Correct. Understood.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions about these action items, for approval? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstentions. David, your 6 motions pass. Is there any new business for the committee? Hearing none, motion to adjourn. Thank you, sir. All right, see you all Wednesday.
I just plugged in my phone. I finally figured out how to plug my phone.
All right.